It's all become a blur for the media as Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton make their final sprint to the battleground states across the country, and the rhetoric in this often ugly campaign has turned even harsher.
She will get us into World War III. She will get us into World War III. I will tell you that. She's incompetent. She will get us into World War III. The arrogant political class never learns.
I am sick and tired of the negative, dark, divisive, dangerous vision and behavior of people who support Donald Trump.
Joining us now to analyze the campaign coverage in these chaotic last days, Erin McPike, a political commentator and former reporter for Real Clear Politics. Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist. And Joe Trippi, Fox News contributor and a Democratic strategist. Erin, a number of pundits came out 2 weeks ago, said this race was over, done, Hillary was going to win, who's going to be in her cabinet, no way Trump could pull this thing off. Was that, in retrospect, reckless?
It was in a way, because throughout the primary, the media kept saying that Donald Trump couldn't win the primary, and then he kept winning state after state after state and became the nominee. I guess we know that the media will never learn, but maybe, just maybe, this time we know that it's always going to be a race until it's over.
Molly, I'm not saying Donald Trump is going to win, but given that whole history of journalists and pundits writing him off and also the avalanche of negative stuff in the press against him, he's still in contention. So what does that tell us about the role of the press here?
Again, people should be very humble when they're analyzing how things are going in this race. That humility should have been built in from how often we got things wrong during the primary. At the same time, this change of heart is actually completely legitimate. It did seem like it was unwinnable a few weeks ago. It's still an uphill climb for him, but the change is because he has gained in the polls and because Hillary Clinton has had such a bad couple of weeks. So this is not necessarily a problem. This is just reflecting the reality of the changed race.
I know your middle name is Humility, Joe Trippi, but many on your side did think it was a virtual lock for Hillary. But don't veteran commentators know that even without the FBI and this other stuff, that races almost always tighten in the final days, presidential races?
I think a lot of commentators said things like that or prefaced it with, hey, anything can change.
The more cautious ones did.
Yeah. But I think, yeah, the media was always goes overboard in these things, and never look. They always get closer at the end. They always do, and so.
But why is that? Because you want to appear so smart that you called it a day before someone else, and then you hope if you're wrong, if everyone loses the video.
Well, first of all, if you're wrong, generally everybody's wrong. When it's going the way it was, when it was going the way it was pre-Comey letter. Where everybody was sure it was going to happen, there's like little danger in doing it.
And you set up my next question. Looking back, did the media overestimate the impact of James Comey sending that letter to the Hill, opening an inquiry into Hillary Clinton's emails, Anthony Weiner's laptop, and all of that, because it was covered wall to wall as if it was the biggest bombshell of all time?
It was a big bombshell, and we talked about this last weekend. It needed to be covered in a big way
I agree with that
weekend when it broke. But I think the coverage has sort of evened out as we've gone on the last 9 days or so. It deserved to be covered because it was a huge story, and the FBI's involvement in this election is something that the media couldn't possibly ignore.
Well, over the next few days after the weekend that story just kind of took over this campaign, Molly, there was an intense media focus on Comey, the FBI director, and whether he was meddling in the election. A New York Times news story even compared him to J. Edgar Hoover. So that shifted the focus, in my view. What do you think?
It was shameful the way the media covered this. There was no daylight between the Clinton campaign's approach to what happened in the FBI letter and what you were reading in many media outlets. This is a story that should have been covered on the substance. You have an FBI investigation into one of the candidates who is running for president. That is just legitimate on its own. How it affects the race should not be the primary concern of the media covering this race, and it's a big reason why people have such a difficulty trusting their media to cover things.
Are you suggesting that the media followed the Clinton campaign line or just somehow came to the same conclusions as people in the Clinton campaign?
You can see it just by the way that the media covered things differently. When the FBI let her get away with the mishandling of classified information in July, a lot of Republicans were upset at that. And you saw the media coverage saying that this was so awful that you would question an FBI investigation. All of a sudden, when this changes, they also change. So it's following the Clinton campaign instead of doing real journalism.
You can't take this out of the politics of it. I mean, it's got to get covered, and there were politics. And the other thing that was going on was the Republicans. I mean, both sides for partisan purposes piled on, and the press initially covered what Chavis and some of the other Republicans and Trump were saying, and that immediately politicized
what they said was that there was a reopening of an investigation, which is obviously true, and immediately you had the media changing the headlines on their stories in response to Clinton campaign complaints, and it was the silliest, most ludicrous thing to say that this is not a reopening of an investigation.
And it's a criminal investigation, and that she's going to jail, and that if he was president, he'd jail her. I mean, come on, they're going to cover that.
There is a legitimate question of whether or not the hundreds of thousands of emails that were found on Weiner's laptop could turn out to be incredibly incriminating for Hillary Clinton or nothing. We don't know, and at the time this exploded, the FBI didn't know because they weren't allowed to read the emails. But at the same time, Hillary Clinton and her people started attacking James Comey personally, and Molly's right. That did sort of become the media narrative to some degree. Or would you challenge that?
No, I think what happened was it was politicized. The Republicans, I mean, I'm not...
You're saying both sides politicized.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Both sides politicized it. The Republicans did, and the Democrats. That's what I mean. Once this all starts happening...
The media should not take part in that politicization process. They should just cover things down the middle of the road. And we have a lot of questions that we need answered about the investigation into Hillary Clinton, into the foundation, and instead we're wasting all this time talking about James Comey instead of the actual investigation.
Because there's an election for president going on, and both sides, and one side is trying to use this to further its cause, and the Democrats are going to push against that. If that means questioning why Comey did it and why he did it at that time, they're going to do that. And then the press has to report all this.
Let me get back to the road to 270 electoral votes. Let me put up a frame grab, as we call it, of CNN the other day. Breaking news banner. We got that? There we see. Breaking news. Look at it's covered by... There we dropped the banner. Clinton dropped below 270 in CNN electoral map. The only breaking news there was that CNN analysts had adjusted a couple of states, and in their count, by their projection, Clinton was no longer a lock for 270. Remember, these are all projections based on analysts. And interesting exchange on MSNBC between anchor Brian Williams and analyst Mark Halperin over the path to 270, which Williams kind of gave Halperin a hard time. Let's take a look.
I think you've gone out of your way to find the path, argue for the path, forge the path for him in an argumentative way with your co-host to the nomination tonight. I thought you were interestingly optimistic. Where are you getting the path of positivity you laid out on your broadcast tonight?
Well, it's not a question of optimism. It's a question of looking at the data.
It's getting rough out there.
That was surprising. Now, the CNN breaking news banner, I mean, we haven't actually had Election Day yet.
Well, that's right.
That was kind of an interesting, strange Chiron. Now, I will say, as you know, to fully disclose my bias, I love playing with the Electoral College map. It's really fun. But put in context, I want to read you a couple of sentences on the front page of the Washington Post this morning. The U.S. presidential election has become an object lesson in everything that ails a country long seen as a beacon of freedom and hope. In the second top story of the Post, it's on the eve of the election, America is afraid. Put in perspective, talking about the electoral map is not quite that bad. You want to take an antidepressant after reading this.
I see. You're suggesting the press has a dim view of this. I wonder how much of that is it's subtly really about Trump. But, Joe, look, as everybody in the press now obsesses on every new tracking poll in states like Arizona and Colorado and North Carolina and Florida and all that, and Donald Trump going to Michigan, and maybe he thinks his campaign does believe they can put that in play, and now even Hillary Clinton going back there and President Obama going there tomorrow, it still seems like a crapshoot.
Well, look, you can't cover this election without the map. I mean, this isn't a national election. I mean, no one cares. Everybody knows how California is going to vote and how Idaho is going to vote. So everything, the campaigns, where they're going, where they're putting ads up, everything.
It's all useful information.
It's all about
Having said that, horse race coverage can kind of overwhelm the actual substance of the campaign. This has actually been an interesting campaign with candidates who have different ideas about foreign policy, immigration, economic policy. When you obsess over horse race politics at the expense of those issues, it kind of teaches people not to vote on issues so much as to vote strategically.
Well, let me just say that back in 2008, the night before the election, David Gergen, who is a CNN commentator, went on CNN and said, I expect Barack Obama to get at least 332, maybe 339 electoral votes. He went on to get 365 electoral votes. I remember watching that coverage and being surprised that someone would go on TV and say what would happen the next day. Now we do it all the time, so it doesn't shock me at all. But it did back then, but we've changed so much, it's what we do.
Got to get a break. Okay. Hold it for the next segment.